Hi guys, this is just a quick look at the preview version of Platform Pro. Please note that this version comes without any kind of warranties expressed or implied. It is what it is. I guess it's probably best for coders to get a look at how the basic mechanisms like movement work, though it might be okay for artists to have a little bit of a play with as well. So there's plenty of features that are only partially implemented and some that are not, quite a few that are not implemented at all. Again, it is what it is. So in this testing folder there's a test scene, which is the one you've probably seen in a few videos. It has the character, some sloped platforms, a hazard, a ladder, some ice, a moving platform and some pass-through platforms, both sloped and straight. The main thing to look at, I guess, is the character. So I'll shrink up all these components. So you notice there's a lot of components on the character. The main one, of course, the character. If we switch to the scene view, you can see that's where we can edit feet colliders, sides, head, or we can just show where they are. We've also got this debug button, which actually shows us the lengths of the colliders and any look ahead. So what I mean by that, I'll just hit play. You'll see that the colliders have two arrows. One is where the collider ends, but then it casts a ray further to see what's coming or to detect other things that might impact the movement. And you'll see that these colliders will actually change size as the character changes speed, which is one of the main changes between the two kits. By changing the side of the colliders, we can make it very easy to work with faster characters while still avoiding collisions. So getting back to our character, we have layer settings. So anything that you want the controller to know about needs to be in this layer mask. So if we hover over the item that tells us something along those lines, geometry is what used to be called the background layer and now is a multiple layer selector. And we have pass-through, which works similarly to how it did in the previous version. So you notice that there's a ladders layer here that isn't in either of these layers, but still considered by the controller. So that's how we can have layers that we interact with but don't collide against. For the short term, you probably don't need to touch that. Slopes allow us to walk on angled platforms. So we've got a checkbox for allow slopes. We can turn them on and off. Max slope rotation, extent that you'll rotate to. Rotation speed is how many degrees you'll rotate in a second. Capped at 360, although technically it wouldn't matter if you did go faster. And minimum wall angle. So this is a new attribute which basically allows you to have slopes which your side colliders won't collide against. So any slope that's less than that angle, you will just walk up it as if it's floor. And what that means is you don't have to add the smoothing geometry that you needed to add in 2D platform controller. So if we have a quick look at the geometry of these cubes, we'll see that it's just a hard angle. There's no special geometry to smooth that. And then in the advanced settings we have some of the settings that probably look familiar to you if you've played with the original controller. There's a button here to restore them all to defaults. Hovering over them will give you a bit of an indication of what they do. Most of these should be fine most of the time. There's the debug collider button I mentioned. These other two buttons aren't hooked up yet. So if you want to have damage and health, there's a health script. It doesn't have a custom editor yet, so you've got starting health, starting lives, max lives. Lives are only partially implemented. Invulnerable time is the time you're invulnerable after taking damage. Death actions, so what happens when you die. So at the moment this one says that you play the death animation straight away with 0 delay, and then you reload the scene after 2 seconds. So there's a few options in there. They're not all implemented. I haven't implemented the respawn system, for example. So for the most part, other than quickly testing it out, I would kind of ignore the health system for now. With an animator, usually that goes on the sprite, but for some reason I've stuck it on this character. It doesn't really matter where it is as long as it's under or on the same object as the character. But the base collision script, so that's the one that handles running into walls and floors and things. There's no settings on that, but you could extend that to add your own variations if you wanted. Gravity, how do we get gravity? We can either set it directly, or we can use the Physics 2D gravity from Unity's physics settings. And then we've got the movements. So the movements are broken up into different movement types. You've got your ground movement, which is basically controls your walking. So we're using a digital movement in this example. Speed of 5. Back and forth. If we change that to 22, we'll start to move a lot faster. So you notice even at that massive speed, we don't get any pass-through issues. Now this drop-down box has a list of all the registered movement types. So I've only got 2 at the moment, a digital and a physics. The idea will be that even on release I'll have a few options in here, and they're really quite easy to make, so this list can grow potentially to hundreds of movements if it gets there. So I've also got a physics type movement where we can have a max speed, some kind of acceleration, friction. So I don't think I've got any notes on that, but about 5 is pretty good, I think. We can choose to use an analog joystick if your input controller supports that, and that will mean that the more you push in a certain direction, the faster you go in terms of acceleration, up to max speed. And then we've got some advanced settings, like if we stand on a slope, will it make us slide? So let's slide that up, about that. So we'll start to slide on these slopes. And notice things are a bit slippery because we've got the friction set to 5. And we've got a platform up here that has a different friction. I don't know if you can hear me tapping the key, but you can see that I slide along it quite a bit. So you get the idea. Air movement, this is jumping effectively, or falling. And again, there's digital and physics built in, but there will be many more on release, and it will hopefully grow over time. So one thing that's nice is with the digital movement, the jump is determined by the height instead of speeds and velocities and accelerations or anything like that. So if we want to jump 8 high, it'll work out what it needs to work out. And we'll jump 8 high. So I think that platform's at 5. You can see that's about 8. Well, give or take a very small amount, it's 8. Also have a variable jump gravity. So in Super Mario Brothers, for example, you have a lower gravity when you jump and when you fall. So we can change that, which will make our upwards part of our jump floatier. That can help you give a nicer feel. We also have the grounded leeway, which is how long after falling off the edge of a platform you can jump for. This just helps give a better feel to platforms where they're moving fast and you run on, jump off the edge. 0 does work, but I think 0.1 tends to feel a bit better. Ladder movement. So only one type at the moment. It's got a value for how fast you climb, and then some options for how you climb off a ladder. So if you press jump, will it dismount? If you move left or right, will it dismount? So if I turn that off, for example, press play, still got my very floaty jump, I think. When I hit, I don't know if you can hear, but I'm hitting left and right and I can't get off the ladder by doing that. But I had jump as an option, so I can still jump off the ladder. You can also have bottom and top dismounts. So if you turn them off, what that means is when you get to the top of the ladder, you'll just keep climbing. Which is how it works in quite a few retro games. So you've got a few options to control how you get off the ladder. And then there's a few more details. So it automatically centers you on the ladder when you're within this leeway distance. So if we made a silly number here, you should snap to the ladder rather abruptly, although of course you're still got to be within range of the ladder for it to work. So there we go, you can see I'm snapping to the center. So the centering rate is how fast that snap occurs. There's a warning here, but that's actually out of date, so I need to remove that. So you may have seen some of the videos where I've shown these warnings. Basically the controller tries to pick up if you're doing something wrong and it tells you about it. There's some in place now and there'll be more before release. So you can choose your ladder layer, or alternatively you can just use tags for the ladders, in which case you can choose a tag, but typically ladders is more efficient. Where tags might be useful is not so much for ladders, but things like wall climb. For example, you might only have 1 or 2 places in your game where you can climb up the wall, so instead of creating a whole layer for it, you may just want to use a tag. Something I recently added is damage movement. So you notice that when you die in a game, you typically move in a certain way. So one thing is just playing an animation, which is one of the options here. And you can say how long the animation will play for. But another thing that's quite common is a little bobble. So when you hit something, you bounce on the spot. So let's put 0.5 in here. And let's go on to this lava hazard. You can see I'm bobbling up and down. And again, I'll add more options. So there's a damage movement is also a death movement. But you can do, they often work a little bit different. So you see in the description there, it says a damage movement which plays an animation and bobbles the character into the air. When used as a death animation, the character will bobble then fall indefinitely. So what does that look like? This character's got 3 health, so damage, damage, death, and we fall off the screen. So that's the movements. There is a couple of other types in the scripts, in the code directory, but they're not really implemented at a point that's ready to be messed around with. Of course, if you want to have a mess around with them, no problem. What else? So the character sprite, at the moment, it's all just Unity sprites. It has an animator, which has all the animation states that I've used so far, but there are many, many more animation states coming. So if I open up mono develop. That's what I've got so far, but I expect we'll probably end up with maybe 100 or so. But what I will also do is have a filter where you can just see the basic ones. So I haven't got an animator with transitions, so it won't look very good if you use a 3D model. What it does is directly plays each animation. There's a little bit of code to just make sure that that works smoothly. There's a collider, so triggers on the characters are now just natively supported, and in order to take damage I've added a hurt box to the collider. It's a trigger. Again, character health is still sort of halfway through, so you can sort of play with it, but I wouldn't expect to do too much with it. Talking of triggers, we go to the scene. There's a whole lot of different types of triggers. One is just a normal Unity trigger. So if we turn that on, it's set up so that it talks to this moving platform. When you enter it, it deactivates the platform. When you leave, it does nothing. We can test that out. Still got that floaty jump, which is great. Makes it hard. There we go. Enter the trigger, turns it off. And then there's other triggers which are not based on Unity triggers. So a couple of custom ones. For example, a one-way trigger, which doesn't have any receivers at the moment. Let's add one. So it's going to send to the moving platform. It will, let's say, deactivate again when you enter it, but it should only do so if we go through from the side with the arrows pointing to it. So if I go like this, nothing happens, but if I go like this, the platform stops. Code-wise, scripts are in that scripts folder. Movement has most of the interesting stuff. Of particular interest, we'd probably be looking at these movement implementations, which is all the drop-down list box options that we were looking at. And as I said, the whole thing is pluggable, so if you follow the patterns that I've used in these classes, your own movements will appear in that drop-down list. What else? Quickly, moving platform. So similar platform class to the other controller. Yeah, we can change the size, and it has some visual indicators. So the mechanism for platforms is in place, and we can set various options for how it works. So we can say activate when it stands on it, deactivate when you leave, hit play, go through the trigger. Then when I go off, it'll deactivate. But that's the only platform type I've implemented. So again, the mechanism is there, but I haven't implemented any special types. One of the many things yet to do. So, have fun.